Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Eric Fraser, psychologist and owner of Top Talent Psychology. And I am delighted to be here today with my friend, colleague, and guest speaker, Dr. Javier Berezdivin, who has his PhD from the Union Institute and University, and his PhD is in interdisciplinary studies. We go way back, and I want to tell some stories about that a little bit today, but I wanted to welcome you to today's program and thank you very much, Javier, for joining. And in many ways, what you'll be doing is leading us in this conversation today on journaling.
So I thank you, Eric, for giving me that opportunity.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, I went back through some of my notes. It didn't really come from a journal, but before we get into journaling, I think it's fair to the listeners and helpful to tell a little bit of backstory about our friendship. And it was back in 1996 when we first met. I was starting my doctoral program in clinical psychology, and I remember hearing a radio program announcement on NPR that brought me to a certain location on a certain topic, and you were on the panel there. And maybe you could tell a little bit about that.
Most of my career has been in the educational system, part of Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And one of the things that I did at that time was to train students to become peer mediators. And so there was a conference where I was invited to, and I brought some of my students along. Um, about conflict resolution and how a program was working. So that's how I got to that particular event.
Yep, I remember that. And I remember you being there with your students and talking about the program and how successful it was in terms of um, basically violence reduction and showing kids how to resolve conflict without fighting, without arguing. Back then, I don't think we really didn't have the internet and the social media problems that we have today with that kind of stuff. But the way that I saw it was really work at the forefront and in an area that was much needed. And I remember going right up to you after the end of that and thinking to myself, man, this guy is doing some really important work in the school systems, and I'd love to learn how to do that myself and to see, where the action is at. And I had, been working with kids in juvenile justice, and that was the beginning of many conversations that we've had over the years, wasn't it?
Correct. But so I want to say that at the particular high school that I was in South Miami, which is a high school that had probably at least 2,000 students, I trained over the years 300 students to become peer mediators, and I supervised 300 peer mediations.
Yep.
So I know for a fact how useful and helpful it was for students to feel empowered to address their own problems and to help their peers. So it was a very successful program, as you said.
Yeah, yeah. No, I remember that. And I remember going to your high school and sitting in sessions and watching how it all worked. And, all of this flows together. I mean, to me, this is really, part of a much broader conversation on habits and thoughts and practices associated with positive psychology, right? And conflict resolution is just one example of that. And that happened to be the experience that we shared when we first met. And that bridged into other areas of what I'll call positive psychology, right? In the sense of how does one develop self-awareness? How does one engage in practices and habits of personal and professional development? And the exciting thing for me was, not only, once we began talking about conflict resolution, and I promise everyone will get to journaling, but this all comes together. But I remember, that opened the door to other conversations, and journaling was one of them. But you introduced me to some really key, I'm just going to call them sort of, maybe not life changing, or maybe they were life changing, but some real, key thinkers like Ken Wilber, philosopher and author, and Mickey Singer, who, this was back in 1996. And, maybe you could say a little something about him, but he was on Oprah a year or two ago. And to think about how 24, 25 years ago, that was someone who impacted your life just in terms of, really personal and professional development and being more compassionate and
Well,
being,
as you're saying, these are life changers.
yeah.
These things change your life.
So tell me a little bit about, though I gave you two names. You can go anywhere you want with this.
Well, I'm very fortunate that I met Mickey, and I call him Mickey, when I was 19 years old, which was shortly before I started journaling, by the way. They're not related, had nothing to do one with the other. But Mickey was teaching a course at Santa Fe Community College. And at the time, he had published his dissertation from UF called The Search for Truth. And so I took his class, and I noticed from the very beginning that this gentleman was onto something very powerful. And I was right, because the time has borne that out. And so Mickey has influenced my thinking throughout my whole life. And so coming back to journaling, at the time that I met Mickey and I was on my second year of college, it was at that time that I found journaling. And I came to it, I don't remember all the ways. So, but one of my professors, Henry Gooch, he's no longer with us, he required all the students to journal if they wanted to get an A in the class. And honestly, the reason I began journaling was because I wanted an A in the class. It was required. So once I started, and I still have that journal with me, which goes back to 1975. It sort of helped me to begin to develop that interest in what is this, how can I do it better, and answering many, many other questions that we'll talk about as we move along.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. And just as a reference for folks that may not be familiar with Mickey Singer, he was the former CEO of this little company called WebMD. So, the crossover that I always like to, sort of illustrate is that, this interconnection between personal and professional development, and if you want to call it spiritual development or psychological development, it doesn't really matter. But this connection is real and it exists, and there are tools to elevate and enhance those aspects of oneself.
So I want to clarify a correction, really.
Okay.
So WebMD bought his company. And so his company was originally called Medical Manager because he built one of the first software programs to manage medical offices. So, once it became very, very successful, after a few years, WebMD bought that out. And he stayed on board in some way or capacity, but so again, it's not like he started WebMD. That needs to be real clear.
Right, right, right. No, I stand corrected, and perhaps he sat in the role of CEO at one point or time or
He
another.
was, I believe it, yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for the clarification. Um, so the journaling. So you started to point out a little bit about the why. First it was to get the A in Dr. Kucher's class,
And Gooch, right, Gooch. Uh-huh. Yep.
and then from there, why did you continue after you finished the class? Why did that matter?
So that's a good question. I'm not sure that I know the answer, except to say that I realized very early on that it was helping me as a young adult. And I've had the fortune to go back and annotate my journals. And when I read what I wrote when I was 20 years old, I can see, my interest and my passion for becoming a more complete human being. But in terms of my expression or, the way that I was writing and even the issues that I was addressing, they just evolved. So I was evolving and I saw that early on. I saw the difference that reflecting on my life was making. So I think that's really the main motivator for me.
Yeah, reflecting on one's life. And to me, that stands out because this concept of self-awareness, right, is really a key leadership skill, right? To have what you and I would call in our discipline the observing ego, right? To be able to self-reflect, become more self-aware, and have better cognizance, perhaps, of our strengths and our weaknesses.
Correct. I would agree with that. And I would say that self-awareness is at the bottom of everything, right? That's what we're trying to develop. Because remember, the word self is there. And the self is a big word, right? It's a being. And so the more that that being can encompass and the more that that being can grow, I would say the more effective that being will become.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And I would say that, you know, I had started journaling before I had met you, but really here and there. But you know, like a number of things that I give you credit for helping me build a habit. You know, the journaling became a habit, and it certainly became a tool for the habit of self-reflection. I like to believe self-actualization, although that's always work in
No,
progress,
it's
of course.
perfect. I agree. It is totally connected to self-actualization.
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you a hard question, because we're going through a pandemic. If for most people, I can't say everyone, but for most people, you know, this is an experience in one's life of the greatest uncertainty that we've ever encountered as a human species collectively, um, and individually, right? So how does journaling, how can journaling um, help us through this, just in a real practical way? Like, how anybody can journal. So why would journaling be a good idea for someone, or helpful to someone, as we go through this pandemic?
So I'm going to try to answer the question, but before I do, I will tell you, you said anyone can journal, and I agree. But then there's the other question is, why is it that everybody doesn't journal? So we at some point, we may address that other question, which is of importance to me. But, you know, as I was preparing for my conversation with you, and the first part is, you know, why should I keep a journal? And one of the reasons is that it's a form of self-care. And I wrote, so it's so always needed in one's life and to reduce stress. So journaling is one of many ways, right? Whether it's running, meditating, doing yoga, many different ways of self-care. But self-care is essential. And I happen to believe that journaling is a very powerful way of doing self-care. Now, if we were going to go one level deeper and go, so how is it that, you know,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
is it
Tell me.
constituted self-care? So, so, you know, that expression of this too shall pass, right? So it helps us in gaining that perspective that we're freaking out now. And we might write in our journal, this is a very difficult time. I don't know how I'll get through it. And some answers may come from the writing, but the great thing is that a year from now, if we go back to what we were writing, we're going to see and we're going to say, oh my God, I made it through. And I would say that the journal helps us to get through very difficult times. And in fact, I feel very strongly about it, where I have been in situations, and I think I shared one with you many years ago when I was teaching a class at FIU in the social work program, and it was like 11:30 o'clock at night, and I had to turn in my grades, and this was an online process, right? The grades were kept online. And I was freaking out because these grades were due by a certain time, and I wasn't sure how to do that technically. And I mean, I felt like I needed to get down on my knees and pray or something. But I brought my journal and I wrote briefly and I said, journal, I know you're going to see me through this experience, even though I'm freaking out and I don't know what to do and I have no idea how I'm going to resolve this problem. But again, I have the hope that you will help me to see myself through. So, in the same way, applying it to this time now, I think a journal can help us to see ourselves through this very difficult experience.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's funny you brought that story up because I remember that. I remember you were really freaking out, panicking, and I think it was that platform Blackboard.com or something, and
Yes.
I had used it in a short adjunct teaching gig that I did, and I remembered the system, and I was like, just relax, it's gonna be fine, don't worry about it, and um, no, I mean you processed it, but I want to go back to um, this notion of self-care because it's not a natural thought, I don't think,
For many
for
people, I agree.
yeah, for many people to think that like journaling, like writing in a book, writing down on a piece of paper, right, is a form of self-care, right? Like
Right.
self-care comes in a lot of forms. But I agree with you completely with the concept, and I wanna I kind of want to like play devil's advocate a little bit to help people maybe overcome some um, misinformation about it or just sort of not having had the experience. But the notion of going back and seeing, the way that I'll put it is like going back and seeing the progress in perspective, right? So not getting caught up, like right now we're caught up in the emotion, right? The stress, the dysregulation, the panic, the worry, right? In the moment. And as you and I have talked, right, it's having this self-awareness is helps one realize that you are not your feelings, right? You are not your thoughts. You are not, right? So it's almost like a transcendence where you're passing that on to the paper, and that's self-care because it's a form of discharge, right? Just like running is a form of discharge of energy. Like, why do we feel more relaxed or less stressful after running or riding your bike or whatever you do? It's a form of discharge, right? And the way I see it is that the journaling is a form of discharge, and that is a form of self-care.
I would agree. And the thought is that the paper holds everything.
Right.
The journal can hold anything. And yes, that's one way of putting it into words. So, I going back to that original question, why should someone keep a journal? And so I wrote that there's at least 100 reasons. And I'm going to mention one book. There's many of them. This one happens to be an ebook, and it's called 101 Reasons to Write a Journal by Samuel Little. It was put out in 2013, and it's funny because these reasons, they're actually benefits. Each one of the reasons that you could use to say, well, this is why I should journal, well, it equals a benefit. And so you could say that there's at least 100 different benefits from journaling, one of which is self-care. That's just one of them.
Right.
So here's I'm gonna mention a few others, and maybe we you want to talk about them. But look, to become a better, healthier, more productive human being, that it does. To reflect on one's life's trajectory, what has helped us, what has helped you, and what has hindered you, and how much have you grown? That's another reason, right? Another benefit. To see your life from a more detached, longer view perspective and gain clarity on your challenges. So we've already addressed that a little bit. You mentioned this thing about the what I'm calling the longer view, the bird's eye view. Um, the next one is to help you to remember the many experiences that you've had. It's amazing how much we forget. In fact, we probably forget at least 95% of what happens to us, where we go. My wife has this funny saying when I ask her, hey, can you remind me of this? She goes, you're asking me, I don't even remember what I had for breakfast. And that's a very normal experience for all of us. Whether we went to the movies, what movie did we see last year? There's just so much that we experience that we forget. But if we jot it down, we're less likely to forget it. Another reason is to leave a legacy to others, whether it's our children, our family, or a legacy to historians, because historians will want to understand this period in time. And that's one of the many uses that journals have. They really help historians to fill in gaps. Another reason that it was a quote that I saw today: what gets measured gets improved. That's a funny phrase. What gets measured gets improved. And I'm sure that is true. And finally, another reason, then I wrote the one about it's a form of self-care. So these are, five or six different reasons. They're all benefits. But there's 95 more.
Yeah, yeah. I like the little saying. It reminded me of a saying that I had from, when I was a kid. I worked for a guy who was a big shot executive at Morgan Stanley, and one of his sayings was measure twice, cut once, and the same principle applies, right? But I like, if I can tie it all together in a way, because I think people search for experiences like journaling and meditation and other aspects of personal and professional development in all different ways. But the benefits that you described, have innumerable implications regardless of what one searches, right? So what I want to make a distinction about is that some people are more inclined towards a personal search, right? Like real existential kind of stuff. Who am I? What am I doing? What's happening? How and where have I grown?
Why am I here?
Why am I here? How do I make sense of all of this, right? For other people, it's kind of like you were saying earlier, like having a place to hold and discharge like those irrational thoughts and just sort of get through the moment, right? And then other people, that are more inclined towards professional development will see that this longitudinal ability to have routine practices and habits of self-reflection, of recognizing progress, like you were saying, right? Measuring progress over time, right? And realizing their having a manifestation of the realization of their goals, right? So being able to have the before and after experience and committing to a process that gets that flywheel going in a continual way.
Yep. As you started to speak, I realize that these are disciplines. We use this word, whether it's meditation, running, different sports activities that we get into. These are disciplines, and disciplines bring structure to our lives, and disciplines have many valuable results, many valuable benefits. And again, journaling just being one of them.
Right, right. Yeah, and I feel like I have to put in a sort of a comical anecdote about discipline, because you're one of the most disciplined people I know, in many ways. And I always, whenever I pull an espresso for myself, I think of your discipline with the espresso. And
Mm-hmm.
tell me about that. How did that come to be?
Well, I want you to know I continue to think about it. This issue again. Drinking coffee is a habit, right? We could call and disciplines are habits too.
Right, of course.
So I read yesterday, because it's on Facebook, that this guy just wrote a book called Caffeinated, and he mentions that he gave up coffee for 30 days, and the benefit that it had, because he realized that it was having an impact on his sleep. And I realized that I agree. It's so easy just to fall head over heels over coffee.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Um,
I'm guilty of that.
so, but so I decided from the very first moment that I started drinking coffee, I would say within the last 5 years, that it could easily lead to an out of control habit.
Right.
And in fact, even journaling could be an out of control habit. That's an interesting thing. That's why, I don't think that journaling should be like an escape. So that's an interesting point I'm bringing up.
Right.
But when it comes to coffee, I said, the only way that I'm gonna be able to maintain control is to make sure that I don't drink it every single day. So in order to make it easy and to remember what day, so I'm drinking coffee now Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, 4 out of the 7 days. But I have to tell you that, when my coffee day comes, like today, I feel like victorious. Like I go, like, my God, I didn't drink coffee yesterday, which to some degree indicates that I'm able to have control over the coffee as opposed to freaking out if I don't have the coffee.
Right.
So I don't know how that relates to the comment.
Well, the punchline, which we kind of left out of this, is that when you do have the coffee, you have an espresso and you never have more than one.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. I realize that one has to work at being in control from the very beginning. And I've been fine tuning my coffee drinking because even on the days that I say, oh, well, today is a Monday, I can drink coffee today, right? It would be easy for me to say, well, then I'm going to have 2 espressos because I won't be able to drink tomorrow. But I'm even fine tuning that. And I'm saying, with one shot, it's enough to get me through the whole day or even the next 48 hours. So I'm fine tuning even the amount of coffee that I'm drinking. And I'm thinking that one double shot should be enough to last me 48 hours.
Yep. Well, I of course, as you know, take the complete opposite perspective on that, and that's the beauty of individual differences. Um, well, I feel like we should sort of wrap this up a little bit, and I wanna wrap it up with one or two sort of take home messages and points for people to just take the next step, or to whether it's the first step or whether it's the next step, I guess is the better way to put it. So for people that are on the fence about journaling, what would you say to them, and what would you encourage them to do?
So the only thought I had, Eric, was that in preparing for this conversation, I broke it down into like 4 areas. So maybe at some point we need to do the second aspect, which is to address your question now. So the next part really would my second question what would prevent me from keeping a journal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm not going to get into it because we just spent, all this time on the first question which is why should I journal?
Right.
But um it it's simple um but not easy. So I would suggest, that we leave that for another conversation because I don't think I will be able to do full justice. Uh, we started at a good place. People need to sort of come to the realization, hey, I need to do this. This would help me. So, what is it what are the contemplative stages? What is it?
Stages of stages of change.
Yes, from whom? From
Stages of change in the addictions. Right. Of course, you're getting me on this.
no, I don't remember either, but it's an important part of work. So the first step really is for people. It's pre-contemplation, right? That's the
Right.
first one.
Right. Right.
So these people,
Prochaska. See, you were pointing out the memory deficits as we age.
yes,
It came to me.
Prochaska. So,
James
so
Prochaska gets full credit for the stages of change model. Yep.
yep. And so, for people deciding that they want to journal, they're going to go through a process.
Right.
And I'd say that first question as to why should I journal would be part of the pre-contemplation to get people to say, yep, I think this would be good for me. I could benefit for these reasons. And then they'll say, okay, so what do I need to do? And so what they need to do is to be aware of what is it that prevents them, what are blocks, what are hindrances, what are challenges to the practice of keeping a journal.
Right. Yep. And my 2 cents to sort of to wrap it up from my point of view on that is, I'm a very plan it, do it kind of person. So my encouragement would be to make a decision later if it's something for you or not. In the meantime, get a journal or get a piece of paper or a couple of them and staple them together. If you don't have a journal or you can't go out and get one now because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and put it somewhere like your nightstand or your desk or a place where you sit and read, and make a decision and commitment to do it once, and then you can decide if you're going to do it again. To me, that's one way to get started if you're in this pre-contemplation phase, like I was saying. We've talked about all of the benefits. We've talked about a lot more. Um, I really enjoyed this conversation with you, Javier. I hope that we have another one soon. I feel like there's innumerable conversations we could talk about. We could have one on mindfulness meditation. We could have another one on spirituality and different religious traditions and the pathways of different spiritual exercises. I mean, we could obviously talk about coffee but this was, really useful and productive to, I think, give a really nice arch to the topic of journaling, and I thank you very much for your participation today and being the guest.
You're most welcome.
Stay well.
Same to you. Take good care.